All right, so buckle up because today we are diving deep into a Cold War mystery.
I'm ready. What do we got?
Imagine, right? 1949, the Baltic Sea,
Yeah.
and a ship, this mysterious ship called the Anfield.
Anfield, okay.
And get this ship, it was carrying weapons, a secret cargo of weapons. And all this comes from, declassified CIA documents. So we're talking, real Cold War intrigue here.
Right from the source, huh?
Oh, yeah. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The intended recipients of these weapons, well, it was Pakistan and Ethiopia.
Whoa, hold on. Pakistan
and
Ethiopia. Those two seem, they seem pretty far apart.
Totally. Like geographically and politically, it's like what connects these two countries to an arms shipment coming from, of all places, Czechoslovakia?
Yeah, I mean, that's a country that's, firmly in the Soviet sphere, right?
Exactly. So that's what we're going to try to figure out today.
Right. I'm all ears. Lay it on me.
Okay, so first, just a quick refresher, right? The Cold War. It's that intense rivalry between the U.S. and the Soviet Union after World War II.
Yeah, those were some tense times.
And each side was constantly vying for, influence around the world.
Supporting allies, propping up governments.
Yeah, exactly. It was like a giant global chess match.
Right. And every move matters.
Okay, so let's talk about Pakistan first. 1949, what's happening?
Well, it's just a couple of years after the partition of India, right? Which is a huge event.
Huge and incredibly messy. Right?
Oh, absolutely. Incredibly violent and led to, a lot of tension between India and the newly formed Pakistan.
Right, especially over Kashmir.
Exactly. Kashmir was, and still is, this major point of contention between the two countries.
Okay, so thinking about this arms shipment, right? Is it possible that, is it possible it was tied to those tensions? Was Pakistan already looking to build up its military, maybe preparing for a potential conflict?
It's definitely a possibility. The timing is certainly suspicious, right? So soon after the partition and the Kashmir conflict already simmering.
Yeah, makes sense. But then there's Ethiopia, so what's the situation there?
Well, Ethiopia was under the rule of Emperor Haile Selassie. And Selassie, he was trying to modernize the country, strengthen his own power.
Right. But wasn't he also facing some challenges?
Oh, absolutely. He had internal dissent, different groups within Ethiopia who opposed his rule.
Okay.
And there were also those border disputes with neighboring countries.
So maybe he needed weapons to, maintain control and deal with those disputes.
Exactly. But here's the thing about Selassie, right? He was a really shrewd politician. He was trying to play this delicate balancing act between the U.S. and the Soviet Union.
Wow, playing both sides.
He didn't want to become completely dependent on either superpower. So he was trying to get aid from both, maintain a certain level of independence.
So taking arms from Czechoslovakia, a Soviet ally, seems kind of risky, right?
Yeah, it's a bold move for sure. Maybe he saw an opportunity, or maybe he was desperate, and the Soviets were the only ones willing to supply him.
It's like a giant puzzle, right?
A Cold War puzzle.
You've got this mystery ship.
The Anfield.
Yeah, with its secret cargo.
Headed for these two countries that seem totally unconnected, Pakistan.
And Ethiopia.
Each with their own unique challenges. It's a real head-scratcher.
Totally, and that's just the tip of the iceberg because there's even more to uncover.
Oh, there's more.
Yeah, because that CIA report, it hints at something even more...
more mysterious?
Well, let's just say that Pakistan and Ethiopia might not have been the final destination for these weapons.
Whoa, okay, hold on. So they were just like a pit stop.
Maybe. But if so, where were those weapons really headed?
Now that is the question, isn't it?
And to answer it, we need to dig a little deeper into the global landscape of the Cold War in 1949.
All right, let's do it. I'm ready to put on my detective hat.
Well, then grab your magnifying glass, because this is where things get really interesting. Remember, we are talking about a time of massive global upheaval. Decolonization is in full swing. New nations are emerging all over the place.
Right.
And a lot of them are caught in this tug of war between the U.S. and the Soviet Union.
So lots of instability, lots of potential flashpoints.
Exactly. So the question is, where were the Soviets trying to gain a foothold in 1949?
That's a good question. Where should we start looking?
Well, there's one region that immediately comes to mind.
Okay, I'm listening.
Southeast Asia.
Southeast Asia. Yeah, that makes sense.
It's just a few years after World War II,
Uh-huh.
and the region's dealing with the aftermath of Japanese occupation.
Right, right.
And there's the rise of communist movements, too.
Yeah, and that was a major concern for the U.S., right? The whole domino theory.
Exactly. They were terrified of communism spreading throughout Southeast Asia.
So you're thinking maybe the Soviets were trying to arm those communist insurgents, like in Vietnam, maybe?
Or Laos, yeah. The Viet Minh, for instance, they were fighting the French in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And they were getting support from the Soviet Union and China.
So it's possible, right? Those weapons, they leave a factory in Czechoslovakia and end up, like, thousands of miles away.
Fueling a whole other conflict.
It really shows you how interconnected everything was becoming during the Cold War.
Right. Like, one event in some corner of the world could have these huge ripple effects somewhere else.
Absolutely. It's like a butterfly effect almost.
And it makes you think about those weapons, too. The rifles, the bullets. I mean, those weren't just like abstract symbols of the Cold War.
No, of course not.
They had the potential to cause real harm, you know? Take lives, change history.
That's a really important point. It's easy to get caught up in the geopolitics of it all, and forget about the human cost.
Yeah, the actual people whose lives were affected by these decisions.
Exactly. The Cold War had an immense human cost. So many lives lost, so many communities torn apart.
And we're still dealing with the consequences of some of those decisions today, right? I mean, a lot of the conflicts we see around the world.
Oh, absolutely. A lot of them have roots in the Cold War.
So Southeast Asia, that's one possibility. Were there any other regions that might have been of interest to the Soviets in 1949?
Well, we can't forget about the Middle East.
Oh, right.
This is just a few years after the creation of Israel.
1948. And that completely reshaped the Middle East, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And tensions were incredibly high.
The Arab-Israeli conflict was just getting started.
And the Soviets were backing several Arab states, right?
Oh, like Egypt.
Egypt, Syria, yeah. They were aligning themselves more and more with the Soviets.
Both ideologically and in terms of military support.
Exactly.
So some of those weapons from the Amphigel, they could have been meant for them, right? Maybe to help them in a potential conflict with Israel.
It's definitely plausible.
It's incredible to think how this one shipment of arms, it could have been connected to so many different things happening around the world.
Yeah, it really highlights the global reach of the Cold War.
And the lengths the superpowers were willing to go to
get an advantage, to spread their ideology.
And it's crazy, right? Because we only know about this because of that declassified CIA report.
Right, imagine how much we don't know.
Like, how many other secrets are still hidden away in archives somewhere?
Oh, I'm sure there are countless stories like this one just waiting to be discovered.
Waiting to, like, rewrite history.
Exactly. Every new piece of information can change your understanding of the past.
Okay, so we've got Southeast Asia as a possibility. We've got the Middle East. But what about Pakistan and Ethiopia themselves? Like, did this arms shipment have any lasting consequences for them?
That's a great question, but it's tough to answer definitively. We can't draw a direct line between this one shipment and specific events.
I see.
But we can talk about the bigger picture.
Okay, like the broader context.
Exactly. So, for example, let's think about what happens when a country becomes reliant on foreign powers for military aid.
Oh, yeah. Interesting.
So both Pakistan and Ethiopia, they accepted these weapons, right? Which means they're becoming, in a way, more beholden to the Soviets.
Like, it creates a kind of dependency.
Yeah, exactly. They need the Soviets to keep giving them weapons, spare parts, training.
And that gives the Soviets leverage.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that leverage can be used in all sorts of ways. Influencing domestic policies, getting economic concessions, even pressuring those countries to act certain ways on the international stage.
It's almost like they're getting caught in this,
a web.
Yeah, a web.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
But it's not like it was completely one-sided, right?
Oh, no, of course not.
Pakistan and Ethiopia, I mean, they were also using this relationship with the Soviets.
Yeah, what they wanted.
Yeah, to get weapons, to counterbalance other regional powers.
Just a delicate dance.
Everyone trying to use everyone else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes those dances can get pretty dangerous.
So it's like, by accepting these weapons, Pakistan and Ethiopia might have actually made themselves less secure in the long run?
It's definitely possible.
They got pulled deeper into the Cold War. Maybe became more vulnerable to manipulation by the Soviets.
That's one way to look at it.
And what about domestic stability?
Ah, yes, that's another key point. Anytime you introduce more weapons into a situation,
It's risky.
it can increase the potential for violence. These weapons could be used to suppress internal dissent or maybe to escalate conflicts with neighboring countries.
It's like you try to solve one problem.
And you create two more.
Yeah, exactly. And in the context of the Cold War, where things were already so tense,
The stakes were incredibly high.
the potential for things to go really, really bad, it was always there.
This is a sobering thought, isn't it?
It is, but it's so important to understand this history, how it still shapes the world today.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what we're trying to do here, right? We're looking at this one seemingly small event,
This shipment of weapons.
and we're using it to understand the bigger picture. The choices made by leaders, the unintended consequences.
And the human cost.
Exactly. And that's something we should never forget.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Like about the rip effects, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's mind-boggling when you think about how this one shipment might have touched all these different parts of the world.
And you got to wonder, right? Were those decisions, like sending all those weapons to countries so far away,
Yeah.
were they ever really worth it? I mean, the risk.
I mean, it's a tough question, right? A question that, historians and policymakers are still debating today.
What I find so fascinating is that, like, we're talking about this now, over 70 years later, and we still don't have all the answers.
That's history for you, right? Always more questions than answers.
Yeah, always another layer to uncover. It's like, we started with this one ship, right? The Athfell.
Yeah.
And we ended up with this whole, like, tangled web of intrigue and mystery.
Absolutely. It just goes to show, how complex the Cold War really was.
Yeah. And it makes you think, right? Like, what can we learn from all of this? Why does this Cold War mystery still matter to us now?
Well, I think it's a good reminder that things aren't always black and white,
Right.
The Cold War, it wasn't just good guys versus bad guys.
Yeah, it was a lot messier than that.
Exactly. Lots of gray areas, lots of different players with their own agendas.
And those agendas, well, sometimes they clashed.
And those clashes often led to, unforeseen consequences.
So it's like we need to be careful, right, about oversimplifying things.
Absolutely.
Oh.
And I think it also highlights how important critical thinking is, especially today.
Oh, yeah, totally.
With so much information coming at us from all sides.
We can't just accept everything we read or hear.
Exactly. We've got to dig deeper, question our assumptions, consider different perspectives.
It makes you wonder, like, what other secrets are still out there?
Right.
Oh, I'm sure there are plenty.
Just waiting to be discovered.
And each one has the potential to change, how we view history and how we view the present, too.
So it's like, this isn't just a history lesson, right?
Yeah, no, not at all.
It's a call to action almost. A call to be informed, to think critically, to engage with the world around us.
To keep asking questions, to keep digging.
And to remember that history is full of surprises.
Well, that's a great place to wrap things up, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the mystery of the Amphigel and its secret cargo. We'll see you next time for another fascinating story from the past.